for our first broadcast for the month of March. This month of March is miscellaneous March. So we're bringing up various topics this month. And I apologize for the delayed start. We were having technical difficulties, so we appreciate your patience. And we have a special treat tonight. Tonight, we're talking about HIV and AIDS in the African American community. We're talking about the truths, the lies, and dispelling the myths. And I have a special guest with us, Miss Darla Kemp. Miss Darla Kemp, you can go ahead and wave to the audience. Miss Darla Kemp, she is our founder of the nonprofit entitled Strive Women's Health and Wellness. And so Darla, she is, I have her here. She's a wonderful guest. She's very knowledgeable. And I want to be able to start with you introducing what your nonprofit is and what you do.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Darla Kemp. My nonprofit is called Strive Women's Health and Wellness. It's an acronym for, I'm so sorry. It's an acronym for Sisters Taking Victory Over This Epidemic. It is around women being sexually conscious, African American women, and being responsible for their sexual health.
Okay, absolutely. And I know that you, how long have you had this? How long have you had the nonprofit Strive? How long have you had it, and what kind of work you've been doing with Strive?
Sure. It's newly, actually, it was originally as you stated, a foundation, recently transformed to a nonprofit. I started this back in 2016. It was very personal and dear to my heart. I did have 3 very close women friends that transitioned from the disease, and I didn't find out that they had the disease until they were on their deathbed, until after that. So that kind of catapulted my knowledge and my awareness for me to kind of start something in their honor. And it recently started, I started the nonprofit. It became a nonprofit in November of 2020.
Okay. And thank you for sharing that, Darla. And I think what's important is that I wanted to share just some statistics with, I don't know if you had some ready right at your fingertips, but I certainly do.
I do.
Okay, great. So if you don't mind sharing, just opening up with just some statistics and some data to share with our viewers.
Sure. Well, the African American women are the second largest population infected from HIV. It kind of fluctuate from the LGBT community to women. We are not being broadcast as much as we're being affected. But we are definitely being affected in astronomical numbers. It's not being talked about as much as it should be. And Women's Empowerment Day, today is a perfect opportunity to kind of express those views and get back to taking care of the African American woman. Regarding statistics, I do have some statistics regarding infection rates and things, how the percentage ups regarding transmission. I don't know if you guys can see this chart here regarding transmission, oral, vaginal, anal, things like that. The transmission is 40 times higher. If you can see this with the oral transmission, the vaginal receptive is 400 times higher. I don't know if you guys can see this. And the anal receptive transmission is 2,000 times higher regarding statistics for African American women.
Okay. Wow. And thank you for sharing that, Darla. And I think what's important is that just to make sure that we're all on the same page for those viewers that are coming in. We're talking about HIV and AIDS and the African American community. And we're speaking about the truth and the lies and dispelling the myths. And Darla is a founder of Strive, which was a nonprofit, and is working to raise awareness and support women in preventing HIV and AIDS and those living with HIV and AIDS, getting the support that they need. But just for those tuning in, know that HIV can affect anyone, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or age. So anyone joining us, we're not trying to put misinformation out there, because certainly it affects everyone across races, across cultures, men and women, heterosexuals, homosexuals, transgenders, and the like. Everyone is touched by this disease, not only in the United States, but around the world. So I just want
Globally.
to, it's a global pandemic, really, epidemic of, of a disease. And so we want to make sure that we are making it clear on the broadcast that it's not just affecting African American women, but we're certainly, with our guests, is highlighting the negative effect that it's having, and the prevalence that it's having among African American women. And later on in the broadcast, we'll also share some other statistics about African Americans and prevalence in the homosexual transgender community as well. So, Darla, was there anything else you wanted to share in terms of statistics? I know you shared about women and the infection rates and the method of how they're being transmitted. Was there anything else? I didn't want to cut you off there.
No, I didn't want to jump in front of you either, but they're seeing a alarming high rate in patients or people over 50. Grandmothers and grandfathers are now becoming contracting the virus as well. So now there's alarming numbers with not elderly, but older statistics as well.
Absolutely. And just to kind of back up and deal with HIV kind of broadly and bring it back into looking at specific groups, let's first off with a basic question. What is HIV AIDS?
Sure. HIV is the human immunodeficiency virus. That is HIV. And AIDS is acquired immunodeficiency virus.
Okay. And HIV AIDS is a virus that breaks down the immune system.
Correct.
In those who live with the disease. And without medication or intervention, that breakdown of the immune system will continue to the point where you don't have a functioning immune system well enough to protect you from the pathogens that we come in contact with all day, every day. So some germs that we come in contact, for those who have a healthy immune system, you wouldn't think anything about it. You wouldn't even know you came in contact with it. For those who have HIV disease that have progressed to AIDS, acquired immunity deficiency syndrome, where their immune system is so compromised that they have literally no protection, they are vulnerable to opportunistic infections. And that ultimately, these infections is what ultimately takes their lives. And so we wanted to make sure we explain that to our viewers about what HIV disease is and what it can progress to. And so, Darla, did you want to share with our viewers, like, well, how do you get HIV and AIDS? How do you get this disease?
Sure. 3 ways of transmission. And I do have, I'm a visual learner as well. So I do have a chart here. I don't know if you can see it. Can you guys see it? Okay. So this is just a chart basically stating the 3 ways that you can get HIV. The first one is, having unprotected sex. The next one is sharing needles. And the last one is transmission from mother to baby.
And also, just to add to that, Darla, is that now that we're in more modern times, we're more aware. There were times when the disease first came on the scene in the 1980s and into even as much into the early 90s, where we were still learning about the disease, that people who were getting blood transfusions, like hemophiliacs, they were, a few of them were getting the disease through just blood transfusions. And it wasn't sexually being transmitted. In fact, Ryan White was a hemophiliac who contracted HIV disease through blood transfusions. And this was back in the early 90s. And so we were still learning a lot about the disease. And so essentially HIV disease is through blood as transmission, and
Correct.
also sexually it can be transmitted. And just like Darla was saying, from
Transportation.
mother to child,
Mhm.
in childbirth, and also through breastfeeding. So from an
Mhm.
HIV positive mother breastfeeding her child, the disease can also be transmitted to her infant.
Correct.
Um, so Darla, was there anything else you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, just to give a little history, as you stated that back in the early 80s, this was called GRID. It was considered a gay-related immunodeficiency disease. Back in San Francisco, New York, they had a high gay population community, and the doctors saw a lot of these virile young men coming to the hospital, and they couldn't diagnose it. So initially, they thought it was a gay-related disease because that's all that they saw. It was maybe 336 cases, and then out of the 336 cases, 136 of the patients died. So the doctors kind of called from New York, and they kind of spoke with each other. I'm like, hey, I got this gentleman. He came in, he was healthy. Eventually, he passed, and they came up with that term. But when someone heterosexual got the disease, they changed it into HIV, what was the human versus the gay related immune deficiency disease. So just a little history from the name.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's still a prevalent thought
Correct.
that HIV is a gay man's disease,
Correct.
and that's not true. That
No,
is not true.
totally
That is
false.
further. That cannot be further from the truth. And so the main mode of transmission is heterosexual sex, but it can also be transmitted, as we highlighted earlier, through IV drug use.
Correct.
Um, receiving blood products infected with HIV disease, which is
Correct.
rare now these days, but there was a time it wasn't. Maternal child transmission, and of course sexually and otherwise. So it's
Mhm.
not a gay man's disease.
Correct.
However, Darla, if you wanted to speak more to like the history of where it started and where we are now, and why that's still a myth that many people hold on to.
Correct. I think the myth is still prevalent today because initially it started like in San Francisco, and the freer LGBT states back then were New York, San Francisco. So a lot of the LGBT community migrated to those areas because there was no judgment there. So initially,
Mhm.
again, they thought it was a gay related disease because initially that's all they saw. So that came with the stigma until a heterosexual actually contracted disease and they changed the name. I think it because it originated initially, they said it was a gay related disease. It's totally false. The stigma, I believe, is still prevalent. I believe not much has changed, unfortunately, with the stigma to the disease. It's people think it's shameful, it's disgusting, it's a dirty disease, because you can get it through sex. And I just think the stigma hasn't changed much, although the medication and we've progressed so much with HIV and medication, but the stigma has remained the same because initially when it came out, the commercials, it didn't do, it was just a scary disease. We weren't educated properly enough about the disease. It was scary, we didn't know, and that stigma is still around. It hasn't changed much in my eyes, but hopefully the stigma can get away because it's stopping people from seeking treatment because of the stigma and the associated shame that comes with the diagnosis and the disease.
Okay. And thanks for sharing that. And I want to share with our viewers just some statistics based on data from 2018 that I retrieved from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is a nationwide and world-renowned authority on infectious disease. And so what they share here is that new HIV diagnosis among adults and adolescents in the U.S. by race and ethnicity, the highest was Black or African American, followed by Hispanic or Latino, and then followed by whites. And
Mhm.
then the lowest amounts were around of American Indians, Alaska Natives, Asians, and Pacific Islanders and Native
Mhm.
Hawaiians. and looking at, now, not to confuse anybody, because we certainly wanted to start the broadcast, being showing, just speaking truthful information and dispelling those myths. So again, anyone can be infected with HIV disease. It is not a gay man's disease. However, we do want to highlight that the prevalence, if you break down out of all the people who are living with and contracted disease, the prevalence in men who have sex with men is higher than it is with other transmission groups. And what's second to men who have sex with men are African American women. And so that's why Strive is here and around, and many other organizations. They're here to support the African American community. And so with that, we do have a responsibility, not only as believers, as citizens, as members of the community, both people of color and of all races, to pay attention to what's happening. I don't know, Darla, if you want to have any comments on that.
I definitely think we do have a responsibility to the African American community, because the African American community sometimes doesn't get the best healthcare, dealing with other health disparities, and just health education. We don't get the best of that, just to continue to educate and make people more knowledgeable, because there are a lot of myths and miseducations and things like that that people don't know. I think if the people are educated and they are active in their healthcare, things like that, we can definitely prevent more people from catching the disease. But if you do catch it, it's livable. You can definitely live with the disease. There's a lot of medication that has come along the way within the last 30 years, but if we can prevent someone from actually catching the disease, we can do that. I think it all starts with patient education, correct patient education.
Yes, and you're right. And so, Darla, what can people do to prevent getting HIV? What can they do?
I think people need to be honest with themselves and their partner. I do think if you're in a relationship or a situationship or whatever type of thing that you're doing with a significant other, you need to have the talk prior to being in the bedroom. And you need to have that honest talk before then, because once you're there, it's kind of hard to bring up that uncomfortable conversation. So I do think if you're planning on engaging with anyone, to do your research, do your due diligence, and have a conversation with them. And not only you need to trust yourself and not put your 100% trust in someone else, and actually go with the person. You guys can get tested together. Make them show documentation, have the uncomfortable conversation. I think that's definitely needed prior to engaging in a sexual relationship with someone. Just being open, honest, and taking care of self-preservation. Just make sure you take care of self first, and do your due diligence with making sure that the other person is taking care of themselves as well, or you're making them step up and do the things that they need to do in order to be with you sexually.
Mm-hmm.
And no sharing like drug needles and things like that. And actually, if you're pregnant, we do promote women to get prenatal care. So that's very important for a mom to get early prenatal care, is early detection. When you first find out you're pregnant, you go to initial OB visit, and they do a panel which they test for all the STDs, HIV, everything. So that initial OB visit is very critical, because if you do have the HIV, they can start the medication to treat the baby, and the infant may not have the disease. So the early detection is critical for pregnant women.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you shared those things. And I think there were so many nuggets in what you shared. And again, our viewers, if you have any questions or comments, we want to hear from you. Please chat in. We certainly want to answer your questions and have you participate in this conversation. But some of the gold nuggets that stuck out for me Darla, you were saying the importance of having these conversations and slowing down to get to know your romantic interests. Because we're not ignoring the fact that, yes, HIV can be transmitted through IV drug use,
Sure.
maternal child transmission, and rarely these days blood transfusions and things or needle sticks or anything like that. But the primary way that HIV disease is transmitted is through heterosexual sex, sexual
Correct.
activity. And so we have to think about this. And I feel like we oftentimes shy away from these conversations about sex and sexuality, about our health, and having these conversations. When you are dating someone and you're considering them for marriage or something serious,
Correct.
you should be having conversations about your health. And your health includes not only chronic diseases. I mean, do you have diabetes, or are you struggling with hypertension? But it also includes, do you have any sexually transmitted diseases?
Absolutely.
I need to know about, because if you're planning to spend your life with this person, you're going to have sexual intimacy. There may be children involved. These are the things you need to know before you make long-term commitments.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say something, Darla? I'm sorry. I know
No,
you were
it's fine. And also,
jump in there.
just to piggyback off that, just so legislation needs to be on one accord as well. I don't know if the viewers know, in DC, when you apply for a marriage license, they make you take an HIV test before they give you a marriage license, which is great. Unfortunately, Maryland does not, or Virginia. So a lot of people, because DC is a little more rigid with theirs, they will migrate to Maryland or Virginia to get the marriage license. So a lot of people are starting their lives together without knowing the status of their future husband or their wife. So I do think legislations all needs to be on one accord with that. That should be a vital thing for, if you're applying for a marriage license, that should be something that should be known to both parties before beginning a life together.
Absolutely. And we have a comment or a question from one of our viewers. Said, from my understanding, the death rate has gone down tremendously over the past 20 to 25 years due to better communication and medication. I'm sure. Praise God. Did you want to comment on that at all?
Sure. Is this Pamela? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call her name, but yes, the death rate has definitely gone down tremendously due to the medication, due to the advancements of the medication, due to a lot of the clinics that are coming out that are non-judgmental zone. So you can have that conversation with the doctor, and you can go to these testing sites, and also they have rapid HIV tests. Now you don't have to wait the 20 minutes. You can get the results in 1 minute. So medicine has come leaps and bounds and really has changed the outlook for an HIV diagnosis. So yes, I do agree. But we still need to have these uncomfortable conversations prior to us, engaging. But it definitely has tremendously turned around. I agree. We still have more to go, ways to go, but definitely has turned around a lot, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And so things have turned around, which I think is a good thing, that things have turned around, but we have so much further to go. And just to kind of give you an idea, I recently attended a webinar, and it talked again about the same topic, HIV and AIDS in the Black community. And what the speaker actually shared was that if you put together all of the African American population in the United States who are HIV positive, we will be ranked 6th, and we were our own country. We would be ranked 16th in the world in terms of HIV disease prevalence, which is right behind Ghana. So just so to put some, put it in perspective, that we've gone leaps and bounds, that HIV does not have to be this automatic death sentence. People can live a long life and thrive with proper medical care and direction, but it is very much still a problem. And I think the stigma, the taboo, the uncomfortableness of people talking about their sex and sexuality, both in the church and outside the church, keeps people in the dark and doing risky things.
Okay.
And so this is why the platform is bringing these things to our viewers, so that we're taking this out of this conversation, out of the dark, out of the tabloids, out of these areas where these conversations kind of come up, or maybe they never come up. And that's just hush hush and whisper and gossip. But we're bringing that out of the dark and into the light to say, hey, this is real and it exists.
Correct.
And we need to be aware, because of lack of knowledge, my people perish. And so we need to be knowledgeable. And I also want to throw in, because I know, Darla, you mentioned about the laws in DC, and how you got, when you apply for a marriage license, they require the the partners to get tested. And I think that's important. And I also want to use as an opportunity to throw in a plug that these high profile cases that you hear about someone knowingly being HIV positive and they're going around infecting people, those things do happen, and in places that's considered even illegal. But I do want to dispel that myth. Most of the time, people who spread around a disease are the ones who don't know they have it.
Correct.
So I want to make sure we're dispelling that myth, that it's not, most of the time, it's not the people who know that they have it that are spreading disease rampantly. It's those who do not know they have it. So I think that's important, and speaks back to testing and screening. Darla, did you want to share anything from your experience about testing and screening?
And again, that's the early detection, again, is key. And just a little nugget as well. A lot of people are unaware that the HIV test is something that you have to ask for. A lot of people think that when you go to your doctor and get the annual test, that it automatically comes with your lab work, but you have to specifically ask for an HIV test, which I think it should just automatically be an annual test. It should come with your lab work, but if you don't ask for it, then they won't give it to you. And a lot of people thought that they were healthy because, like, oh, I went to the doctor, I got my labs done, I didn't have anything, not knowing that that's a specific test you have to ask for. So again, hopefully that can be something that can be added with the annual test, because that's something very important, but that is a test that you have to ask for. And now they have a 4th generation HIV test. Before they were using for a rapid was a 3rd generation HIV test, which tests for the antibodies, the HIV virus 1 and the HIV virus 2. Now they have a test, it's the 4th generation test. It's called the Alere testing. I don't know if you can see it, HIV combo. This is the actual test that when you go to your doctor, it's the 4th generation test where they take the blood. This is the actual test in the Insti kit. So this test tests for the antigen, which is the first part of the virus, the antibodies, HIV-1, HIV-2, where that's the 4th generation. So this test here can get an early detection. Normally it would be a 90-day window that you would have to wait to get an HIV test. This will catch an early infection in approximately 3 weeks after an exposure. So this test is very good. It's a rapid test. It takes approximately 20 minutes for you to get your results. And I have a demo. I'm sorry, guys. Give me one moment.
Take your time. This is great. I'm so glad you're sharing this with us.
Sure. Okay. So this is it's a normal finger stick. I'm sorry, I can't. Okay. It's a finger stick. So this kind of show you. Oh, sorry, wrong side. Can't see. Okay. It's backwards. I'm so sorry, guys. But it shows you. It's a finger stick, like a diabetes stick, where you would do just a prick here, and they will get your blood with a pipette. And once they get the blood, they will put it on the strip here. I'm so sorry, this is backwards. And you can see the results. A reactive test, a non-reactive is a negative test, and an invalid test. So this will show you the AG is for the antigens and the antibody. So if you take this test and the line comes up in the antigen, that's the early detection test, meaning the infection was recent. If it comes up in the antibody test, it was a later infection. So you may have had it for a while, but this is a great tool. So if we can get this done, then we could protect any partners that you've had and get you on medication early versus the 90-day window.
Mm-hmm. Also, thanks for sharing that, Darla. Also, are you able to share with our viewers where they can get tested if they've engaged in sexual activity, and they weren't expecting it. It happened. It's potentially exposed. They didn't know the person that well. Whatever the scenario is that brings you to the point, where can they go or what can they do to get tested?
Sure, they have a couple of options. You can actually go to get tested at your doctor. Of course, there will be a wait. So if you want an instant test, you can go to AHF, you can go to Whitman Walker, you can go to Us Helping Us. These are all local. DC has a lot of resources for you to go and get instant tests. And also, when you go to your doctor, you can get it's called PEP. I'm sorry, post-exposure. Yes, it's called PEP. It's post-exposure prophylactic. And this is a pill that if you take within 72 hours, it's the same pill that's been around when we had rape victims. They would urge patients to go to the doctor, don't take a shot, go to the doctor so they can give you this pill. So if you take the pill within 72 hours, it will lessen your chances of the transmission of HIV. And this is also the same pill that you would take if you work in a healthcare setting and you got a finger prick. They will give you, the same pill, and monitor you and have you come back and get tested just to make sure no transmission has been done. But you can always go to your physician, your private physician, or you can go to your local testing centers. They're all around DC. AHF is a big one. Whitman Walker Clinic is a huge one as well. Us Helping Us, they're all over the DC metropolitan and Maryland area.
And thanks for sharing that. And I think it's so important that we not dismiss the importance of your health and
Correct.
staying knowledgeable and visiting your primary care provider at least annually to get blood testing, not only just screen for any sexually transmitted diseases, but also just have awareness of your overall health. How's
Correct.
your blood sugar doing? How are your lipids? How are your what's your blood pressure look like? I mean, these things need to be checked. And so it's same as with in looking at infectious disease, and specifically we're talking about HIV and AIDS tonight. But it's very important that we take those steps to do that, and to be knowledgeable about what's happening with your body and be able to bring that information and be in a place of strength to say, your status. And if you're thinking about considering a lifelong commitment, where, and you're planning for these are things you can share with them. Say, hey, I've been tested. These are the dates. If this was 6 months ago, we can also go together and test together, and you really need to be able to navigate these. And I don't want any of our viewers feeling like, oh, well, we're Christians, we don't do that. That's a conversation for another topic, another day, where we will dispel those myths. We know what the Word of God says, but we also know sex is happening inside and outside the church. And so we need to be real about these things and really think about what we're doing and the decisions that we're making. And so so the viewers out there, put on your grown up man and woman panties and underwears and step out and confront this truth and and do that. And so I wanted to toss it back to our audience. Of course, if our audience wants to chat in, you have any comments, we're open to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to answer your questions. We want you to join this discussion. Anyone who's just now joining us, again, this is the platform, and we're talking about HIV and AIDS in the African American community. We are dispelling the myths, we're exposing the lies, and speaking about the truth. And we have our special guest here, Darla Kemp, who is the founder of a nonprofit agency called Strive. And so we're here with her, and we're having a very frank conversation about this, so that we can be knowledgeable and make better decisions, and support health. So in general, in your thoughts, Darla, what do you think the HIV/AIDS epidemic is doing to the African American community? What do you think it's doing, in your opinion?
I think it's ravishing the African American community. I think it has always ravished the African American community, just due to not having the proper education, just not discussing it anymore. I know back in the 80s there were posters, there were billboards everywhere, and it kind of scared some people straight. But now is people don't talk about it anymore. It's the, like you said, the taboo topic. So it's kind of swept underneath the rug, but it's just doing the African American community such an injustice, because our rates are alarming, and we're leaving children without parents, and children to cope for themselves and things like that. So the African American community are already plagued with so many other health disparities, low income, things of that nature that have been prevalent forever with the African American community. So with the HIV and the AIDS, this is another thing that we have to combat. But I think with knowledge and using our voices, and this platform is a wonderful thing, just to start back talking about it, because a lot of children, people don't talk about the children whose parents are deceased or have to deal with this disease, how it affects the family overall, the support for the family, the mental welfare of the child as well, and also the person that is living with HIV that hasn't come to terms with their diagnosis, that needs mental help and things like that. I think if you're worried about these other avenues, like somewhere to stay and your mental health and things like that, you won't be taking your medication and things on a regular. So once we get those things stable, and then we can kind of focus on the healthcare, because if that is not right, everything else is not going to be correct.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And just as you were saying, steps like this, these small steps make an impact in our community and what we're doing, just by raising awareness and talking about it. Because there's so much shame, there's so much myths out there. There are many people who still believe they can get HIV disease from casual contact, from sharing dishes with someone who might be HIV positive, giving them a hug, holding hands. These are very basic things. And in the medical community, we kind of take for granted how many people still believe that. And that's not true. It's not true. So that's another myth that we're busting up tonight. It's not transmitted through casual contact. So giving someone who's HIV positive a hug, you all sharing the same dish, those things are you're not going to get it from a toilet, things like that. And so we want to make sure we throw that out there. And so we want to stop perpetuating these myths and these lies, because they keep myths and lies keep people bound, and people don't make better choices. And it, perpetuates shame and guilt and isolation and division. And those things are not of God. And so we want to make sure that we are protecting and loving on the folks that are in our lives. If you're living with the disease, that you're also feeling loved and supported and protected from not only the medical community, your family, if at all possible, your social circles in the church, where we can be a safe place. And so now that I've mentioned that, Darla, what do you think the community can do, the church or the community? I know you've been pretty active. You created your own nonprofit in addressing this, but do you think what can the church do? What can anyone else or the community members do to combat this epidemic?
I can answer that in two parts. The community can continue to talk about it, continue to do the foot traffic to go and test. I did start a program back in 2015, 16. It's called Love Thy Neighbor, which I will go to different neighborhoods, primarily in DC, Ward 6, 7, and 8, and do HIV testing in the client's home. Those who didn't want to go out, those that were ashamed to go out, those who were scared to go out, I would go into their homes and do the HIV testing. If I got any positive results, I would get them linkage to care services and get them appointments for them to follow up with an infectious disease doctor. But that's something that the community can do, is again love on each other and hold these city officials accountable, because this is something that is ravishing the African American community. And regarding the church, I really believe a no judgment free zone. I mean, I know that ideally sex before marriage is you're not supposed to do ideally, but it is happening. So just meeting people where they are in a church community and no judgment, because I think a lot of people, if they had that level of comfortability and transparency, that people would come to the church and maybe have a testing event at the church and get the youth involved. I think the youth is the key. Once they're involved and they're knowledgeable and they know that once they learn something, they'll spread the word. So I do think getting the youth involved and the no judgment zone would be ideal for the church.
Mm-hmm. And I like that, and thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to put up that we have a viewer that chatted in a question. And the question is, do you think the improvement in treatment may be also contributing to more sexual activity and transmission, or is this a myth? So it's a great question. You want to chime in on that, Darla?
Sure. I do think some of Magic Johnson made a statement about him coming out in 1992, and he felt like that was a gift and a curse, because people look at his situation and they think like that will be their end result. So they're not as careful. They're not as careful as they would normally be. So he feels great about coming out, but he feels bad about the image that portrayed to a lot of African American, just people in general, because they weren't taking it as seriously as he thought they should. And I do think because with the drugs that has come along, and not being properly educated as well, that the seriousness of it is not as prevalent as it was back then. So yes, with the new drugs and things like that, I do believe at some point that is a factor. I do agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing that, Darla. And I think it's important that we also look at, because I think it was a very great question, and I think there are a lot of complexities to that question. Let me put it up again. I think there are a lot of complexities in it, because I think the easier way to answer that is looking at, okay, so along those lines, so does legalizing marijuana make more people want to use it? Do we have advanced in medication and drugs for diabetes? Does that make people want to sit around and still have a sedentary lifestyle and still eat crazy and do these things that may increase their risk for having diabetes, because now we got better medications, you can live long with that? And I think you can kind of raise that up about anything, really, and throwing that out there. But I think it's important that we not use that as a let me just say, not an excuse but a crutch, because we celebrate the advances in modern medicine. God bless us with a beautiful mind, and there are people who have very intelligent, have researched and studied and came up with treatments. And I also believe there's a cure out there as well. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see it in our lifetime, mass produced, and this will be a conversation of the past. But until that happens, I think we can encourage people to be knowledgeable, to take a proactive role in their health, and don't use the fact, don't misuse the information, don't abuse the information to promote lasciviousness, to promote risky behavior.
Correct.
And I really feel like, people, you know, it's like, hey, now that we have seatbelts in all the cars, should we drive faster?
Mhm.
Should we drive fast? We take more risks. And I think, yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's a reality. I think when
Mhm.
people feel a little comfort or feel like there's a little bit of a safety net, they may be a little bit more willing to push the limits. But I don't think we should stop there and dwell there, but rather look at it from the angle of like, well, what can we do not to go over the cliff? What can we do to to prevent that and to educate ourselves and celebrate healthier ways of doing relationships so that we're not increasing our risk of transmitting diseases amongst each other
Mhm.
and using that approaching it from that angle.
Correct.
And for those who do have the disease, who are living with HIV, or they just found out, oh, I just found out I got this disease. Darla, what do you think they should do? What are their next steps?
I definitely think they should seek treatment from a medical professional, because the sooner that you get in care, we can, start treatment, and that'll be better for you. That'll be better for any partner that you may have, and also a support system. Someone, it doesn't have to be a lot of people that you tell, but maybe someone that you can confide in. Doesn't have to be a family member. It can be a linkage person. It may be your doctor, but just someone that you can speak with and have those in-depth conversations with, because you don't want someone to hold that in, or feel ashamed and they can't tell anyone about the diagnosis. So you definitely want a support person. It doesn't have to be a friend. It doesn't, because you may not be at that point where you're really ready to disclose. I'm sorry. So when you're ready to disclose, just make sure that it's someone that you're comfortable with and you can have a transparent conversation about how you're really feeling. There are support groups that people can go to. There are anonymous hotlines that you can call. There are all types of resources that will kind of help a person with a diagnosis, or a diagnosis.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, and and here on the platform, we don't shy away from um, our the power of God and
Mhm.
faith healing. And I know that I'm throwing a bomb out there, and and it may be controversial depending on who you're speaking to, but certainly we believe in the power of God. We believe in healing, but we certainly are not saying that by seeking medicine, modern medicine, getting treatment is somehow anti-God, or you don't believe God can, because God uses medicine too. He uses people to heal. And so those who are out there that are listening, we certainly believe in the power of God and the healing power of God, and we will encourage you to seek help from the medical community if you test positive, to get the medications that you need, but also buttress that and support it with prayer and
Mhm.
faith, and support and love, and let that healing love be a balm to your soul as
Mhm.
you walk through this, and go through this, and learn to go from surviving to thriving with HIV disease. And you can fill in the blank with any disease for that matter.
Correct.
I think, and so we're not here to judge. We're not here to say, what's wrong with these people, because it could be any of us.
Mhm.
It can be any of us. Anything can happen. You thought it really could be any of us. People are
Mhm.
getting disease inside marriage and outside of marriage. Okay.
Absolutely.
On drugs and not on drugs. And it goes on and on. And so you never know. And I think what's so important is what we're doing is to, to illuminate your mind through the truth, and kick down those doors of shame and ignorance,
Absolutely.
because that's keeping the community bound. There are a
Mhm.
lot of misperceptions floating around out there. There's a lot of which is a later broadcast, but mistrust in the medical community. And I
Correct.
feel like as African Americans, To be honest, in America, we have good reason not to mistrust, to not to trust the medical community. So we have a lot of barriers we're trying to clear, a lot of hurdles we're trying to clear. But this is just a start. And this is just a start. Darla, you have anything you want to say to that?
No, that was a great point regarding staying in prayer and keeping your faith through just anything in general, not just this. And again, if you're newly diagnosed, you're not alone. And there are a lot of resources that can assist you with anything that you may need. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So if anyone wanted to be involved in your nonprofit, hey, I want to support your cause, what you're doing, support the women, or maybe there are other, groups that are around that supporting men and women and children living with the disease. What can they do?
Sure. They can contact me directly. My direct number is 202-352-1313, or they can email me directly. My email address is Darla, Kemp@yahoo.com. I do a lot of community outreach. I do a lot, well, with COVID, of course, it has slowed down everything. But when the world was open, I did a lot of speaking engagements at Covenant House, a homeless shelter for the youth. I did a lot of speaking engagements at schools, anywhere that I can speak, just to kind of get the awareness out there.
Okay, and I want to make sure that I'm providing that information for the viewers. So I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Hold on just for a second. Let's see.
No problem.
So I want to make sure I'm getting it right because it came out kind of fast. So I want to put that out there. Put your email. And thank you so much for sharing that. Put that out there so those who are viewing can see, and they can certainly email you if they want to get involved. And then we have another question from a viewer. And so I want to put that out there as well. So for those who are viewing, please make note of that. Email address is out there for you to view. Please email her if you want to get involved. I'm sure she would love it. I'm sure she would love it.
Thank you.
And also, here we have a viewer said, as a pastor, I believe the church is the right place for this conversation. Jesus came to those who were sick. Amen. Any thoughts on that comment, Darla?
No, straight to the point. I do believe that will be a great place to start. Absolutely. I definitely believe start, keep, and continue. Yep, I do.
Absolutely, because the reality is people are dying in shame.
Yeah.
They won't tell anybody. They're getting sick. They're not going to the doctor. They don't know why, or maybe they have been to the doctor and got the news and they're in denial.
Correct.
They're so terrified of letting their family know, letting their friends know, their church members know, because I don't want to be judged as the dirty person or something's wrong with me. And they allow themselves to get sicker and sicker until it could eventually kill them. And in the process, they can be transmitted to other people. And so we want to not have that continue.
Correct.
And want to be able to say, no, we're not doing that. We're coming out, we're breaking down those doors of shame, and we're opening up those doors and say, hey, we're not here to say, you're unworthy of love and forgiveness and treatment and healing because this happened to you, whether you were a willing participant or not. Because things can happen violently against you that you didn't ask for or didn't want or didn't put, and so there are a lot. Not all stories are created equal, and there's so many different things that or paths where people end up that lead to where they are now, and you certainly can't put people in a box. And I wanted to share with our viewers just a couple of photos that you shared, Darla, with me about your nonprofits. I want to make sure I do this justice and share it with everyone so everyone can see it. And let me know if you can see it too. Do you see it on you see it? Let's see. Give me just a second.
Sure.
There we go. There we go. You see it?
Yeah, I was at children. Those quilts are actually, they were made by some children at
Mm-hmm.
Children's National Medical Center, Children's Hospital in DC for HIV. So each quilt has a personal message to someone who either passed from HIV or a family member.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad you shared that. And I think, and you and Darla, you looking fly right there. Look at that nonprofit extraordinaire. She looking real fly right there.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, looking real fly. Oh, goodness. And I certainly want to share that with our viewers because, just to show that you're in this, you're in this fight,
Absolutely.
you're in it, you invested yourself into this,
Yes. No
and it's
outside resources financially. Everything
absolutely.
that I've done has been out of pocket for myself. No
Mm.
backers, no anything. So everything, I've used my own resources to fund this. Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Definitely committed. Yes.
Wow, wow. And so I certainly want to, honor you and thank you for your commitment to women, to people living with HIV and AIDS, and that you're willing to not just talk about it, but be about it and wrap your arms around those who are sick,
Absolutely.
and to help because it takes quite a bit to walk through life with someone who's suffering,
Yeah.
whether it be spiritual suffering, um, emotional suffering, or physical suffering. It takes a special love
Yeah.
in your soul to do that. And so, for you walking beside these women and helping them and standing for justice and standing for truth, I salute you and I honor you for
You.
that. And
Thank
I
you.
yes, and for those out there, pastors, clergy members out there walking hand in hand with those who are suffering spiritually, and you up all night taking calls in the middle of the night, out there trying to love on people, praying, I salute you as well. Those counselors who are out there who are working with the emotionally
Yeah.
unwell, they're emotionally sick, they're mentally sick, and they're out there spending those days, hours, times, all hours of the night in during the day, seeing them in counseling offices,
Yeah.
supporting people. I salute you. And so these caring positions, it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
whole lot. It's a whole lot to walk through. And I thank God for you and your heart for people
Thank you.
and this opportunity. And I hope our viewers are being blessed. I have been blessed by this conversation. This is by no means an end to this conversation. There's so much information, there's so much more ground to cover. And I think we can have a part two. I don't know about you, but I think we can certainly have a part two
I'm
because I
for
would
it.
love, absolutely, because I would love to be able to have those who are living with HIV or AIDS and be able to come and speak their truth and speak their
Absolutely.
experience because I think it's important. There's no one that can quite speak about experience except for someone who's lived it.
Absolutely.
And so I'm a medical professional, but a lot of ways, on some things, I'm on the outside looking in. If I'm
Correct.
not living with it, there's only so much I can say or do to it or speak to that. And so our viewer chatting in great information,
Thank
and I
you.
hope everyone was blessed. I hope everyone was blessed by this. Any final thoughts, Darla, at all?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me on this platform. Again, for me being able to speak to additional viewers. Because of COVID, I haven't been able to get out and kind of do my footwork that I normally do. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to continue to thrive and be guided and do what I need to do to end this epidemic. That's what the acronym is for: Sisters Taking Victory in this epidemic. And that's what I plan to do, just to continue to thrive and push forward no matter what the circumstances are. That's my goal and that's my mission. But thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And to all of your viewers, be blessed to be a blessing. Take this information, digest it. Go to credible websites, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention,
Correct.
cdc.gov. Look it up. There's a wealth of information. It's probably overwhelming the amount of information that's there. Go to the website, check it out, read about it. Challenge yourself to think outside the box. Challenge yourself to think about, well, what myths, what misinformation am I believing and perpetuating? I want you to challenge yourself and think outside the box
Correct.
and think how you can help men, women living with HIV disease, and embrace people from all walks of life. However they feel that find themselves or life has taken them, that you be able to embrace them. That is the love of Christ. If you have gifts that shake the rafters, but you have not love in your heart, you're a liar. There's no love in you. And so that's not, we're about love, not just about gifts and wonderful talents. We're about love here on the platform. And so I thank Darla again for being part of this. I
Thank
thank
you.
my viewers for tuning in. March is miscellaneous month. We're bringing all kinds of miscellaneous topics up. And so I think we might have a part 2 to this looming. Please like, subscribe, share to the Prayer Tower Church channel, YouTube channel, also Facebook. And as well, you can always visit our the Prayer Tower Church website, prayertowerchurch.org /live to tune in to any of our broadcasts. Thank you again for tuning in. Be blessed to be a blessing until we meet again.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you.
Yay!